The wilderness of Alaska is merciless. In 1983, it was still one of the most remote places on Earth. Roads ran out. Civilization dissolved into nothing but spruce forest, frozen rivers, and silence. If something went wrong out there, if someone disappeared, you might not find them for years. Or ever. Robert Hansen knew that better than anyone. He'd been hunting those woods for over a decade. Not moose, not elk. Women. In September of 1983, a construction crew working along the Nick River outside Anchorage unearthed human remains in a shallow grave. The bones had been there a while. Investigators identified them as 17-year-old Paula Gouling, an out-of-work secretary who had moved to Alaska from Hawaii. She'd been missing for 5 months. She had taken a job as an exotic dancer to make ends meet. Near her body, they found a single shell casing, a .223 caliber round. A year earlier, investigators had found another body in almost the same spot. 23-year-old Sherry Morrow, also a dancer, also a .223 shell casing. Her gold arrowhead pendant, the one she never took off, was missing. The FBI ran ballistics on both casings. The results came back conclusive. Both women were killed by the same rifle. Alaska had a serial killer. Between 1980 and 1983, 12 women had been reported missing in the Anchorage area. That was just the reported number. In a city built on transients and fresh starts, disappearances didn't always get filed. A woman could vanish and no one would know who to call. Alaska state troopers set up a task force. They had bodies and shell casings and a growing list of names. What they didn't have was a suspect. And in a wilderness that big, finding one would be nearly impossible. They called Quantico. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the original criminal profiling team, had been operational for only a few years. John Douglas was one of its lead agents. He'd interviewed killers, mapped their minds, built profiles that could narrow a field of thousands down to a handful of names. He'd never worked a case quite like this. Based on the crime scenes, Douglas concluded the killer was an organized, methodical predator. He was comfortable in the wilderness, likely a hunter, possibly a pilot given how remote the grave sites were. He preyed on women who wouldn't be believed. He had difficulty connecting with women in normal social situations, likely due to a childhood marked by ridicule or humiliation. He almost certainly had a stutter or significant speech impediment, and he was hiding in plain sight. Someone like this, Douglas said, would be holding down a normal life, a job, a family, a reputation he'd worked carefully to protect. The hunting, the real hunting, happened somewhere else. Meanwhile, in Anchorage, a single police officer was pulling on a different thread. Officer Greg Baker had never forgotten about a woman named Cindy Paulson. On June 13, 1983, 3 months before the Nick River remains were found, a motorist picked up a teenager wandering the streets of Anchorage in the early morning. She was barely dressed. She was wearing handcuffs. Her name was Cindy Paulson. She was 17 years old. She told Officer Baker that she had been abducted the night before. A man had offered her money, put a gun to her head the moment she got in his car, driven her to a residential house, chained her to the ceiling of his den, and raped and tortured her for hours. Then, he told her he was going to fly her out to his cabin in the wilderness. At the airport, she ran. Cindy described her attacker as wiry, scruffy, around 6 feet tall, with glasses and a pronounced stutter. Officer Baker tracked down the car. It belonged to Robert Hansen, a 44-year-old baker who ran a successful pastry shop in Anchorage. He was well known in the city. He'd won awards. He coached youth activities. He was the last person anyone would suspect. Police brought him in. His friends provided alibis. His house was searched. They found a collection of weapons, which wasn't unusual in Alaska, but the chain and the gun Cindy described were gone. There was nothing solid enough. Hansen was released. Cindy's occupation gave police an excuse to dismiss her. She was a prostitute. Hansen was a respected businessman. The Anchorage police dropped the case. Baker refused to let it go. For months, he kept notes. He kept watching. When the Nick River bodies surfaced and troopers began talking about a serial killer, Baker reached out. He told them about Robert Hansen. He told them about Cindy Paulson. Everything began to converge. Troopers dug into Hansen's background. What they found was alarming. In 1971, he'd been arrested twice, for kidnapping and for the assault with a deadly weapon of a young woman he'd taken to a cabin at gunpoint. He'd received lenient sentences. Psychiatric evaluations described him as deeply unstable with violent sexual fantasies. Then he'd moved to Alaska, and the women started disappearing. The FBI profile fit Hansen like a glove. He was an avid hunter and pilot. He owned a Piper Super Cub, a small aircraft that could land on gravel bars and frozen rivers. He had a stutter. He was a business owner. He was married with children. He was exactly the kind of person no one would look twice at. But troopers still didn't have enough for a warrant. They needed something physical to connect Hansen to the killings. Then John Douglas had an idea. He'd studied enough killers to know that they kept trophies, not always the dramatic kind. Sometimes something small, a piece of jewelry, a memento, something to relive the fantasy later. He told troopers, search for anything that might belong to a victim. Jewelry, personal effects, and look for a map. A killer this organized, this methodical. He would know where all his victims were. On October 27, 1983, investigators executed a search warrant on Hansen's home and aircraft. In a crawl space above his garage, they found a Ruger Mini 14 rifle. Ballistics matched it to the shell casings found at both grave sites. And they found the jewelry. Sherry Morrow's gold arrowhead pendant, items belonging to other missing women. And they found the map, a sectional aviation chart of the Nick River area tucked behind his reloading equipment, across the wilderness, marked with small X's, 24 of them. Hansen was arrested the same day. When investigators began excavating the X's, they found bodies. Some women were never identified. Some graves were never found. The wilderness had done its work. Faced with the evidence, the rifle, the jewelry, the map, and Cindy Paulson's testimony, Robert Hansen eventually confessed. He admitted to hunting 17 women. He described how he would take them in his plane, release them into the wilderness, give them a head start, and then come after them with his rifle. He said it was the only time in his life he felt powerful. In February of 1984, Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years plus life without the possibility of parole. He died in prison in 2014 at the age of 75. Investigators believe the 24 X's on his map didn't represent all of his victims. John Douglas would later write that killers like Hansen operate on fantasy, and their reach is almost always wider than what gets found. Several of the names on Alaska's missing persons list from those years were never matched to a grave. They're still missing. In a wilderness that big, some secrets stay buried. If this case stayed with you, share it. And subscribe to Verdict Files for more cases like this one.